Section 68 of the Constitution says every person has a right to an administrative conduct that is lawful, prompt, efficient, reasonable, proportionate, impartial, and both substantively and procedurally fair. So today, you are joining us at the Defiant Students' Voice podcast, looking at the state of tertiary institutions in Zimbabwe, specifically the administrative aspect. So thank you for joining us today at the Defiant Students' Voice. Do you mind if you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Our convivial salutations, our fellow members of the academia, our fellow members across Africa and the world, and of course the entire cosmos. Sending here is Tatenda Kutsirayi, the Harare Spokesperson, and I'm being glad to be hosted here by one and only the mouthpiece of the Giant Union, which is Comrade Lifeline Kuta.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming to this podcast and having your time devoted to address some issues which are facing students, but looking at the administrative aspect. So I would like to take you on a brief background of the tertiary institutions in Zimbabwe. We've discovered that our tertiary institutions, we've got those which are state controlled, then those which are private. But basically, in student issues, in student problems, we've discovered that most issues arise from the state-controlled universities, and many issues evolves around the administrative aspect. Then we look at the Constitution. Section 2 of the Constitution talks about the supremacy of the Constitution, saying that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, which means that even if there is an entitlement given under the Constitution, that is Section 68, looking at the administrative aspect, institutions, both private and state-owned institutions, they should adhere to the precepts or to the envisages of Section 68. So I want you to give us a brief reflection from your own point of view at the state of the administrative aspect, looking at all those institutions, both private and state-owned.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by mainly focusing on the state-owned universities in which we are coming from. Looking at the state-owned universities in terms of their administrative framework and their administrative conduct, we have seen that most of the admins they continue to be mischievous, they continue to be unconstitutional, and they continue to run their criminal activities and running these institutions like their tuck shops. If you look maybe at the issue, a recent issue at the Great Zimbabwe University, where the university charged 50% of the fees in US dollars to say to students that if you pay that 50% and then you are now able to register and write your exams. But then the issue of fiscal indiscipline now comes into play as one of the ZINASU campaigns. We are fighting fiscal indiscipline. So we took GZU administration to court, to the High Court, to say, no, but the RTGS by then was the legal tender. So it should be able to pay this required tuition fee. And then we actually won that court case. And when we won that court case, now the administration at the Great Zimbabwe University changed this goalpost to say, no, the 50% we said, yeah, and now you are required to pay full fees in RTGS, in USDs, I mean. And if you do not do that, you are not able to write your exams. So it shows the inconsistencies within the administration, and it shows unfairness because it's constitutionally underpinned that administration conduct should be fair to everyone. And when you now come to say, no, I pay fully in USD when I'm getting the salary in RTGS, it shows unfairness and unequalness on that aspect.
Okay, I've seen you've mentioned about the issues of unfairness. So I want to ask you a question, which I need your personal opinion on it. So can you say the general status of those tertiary institutions administratively, they have been unfair, but remember, you've got student representative councils at your different institutions, and administrations, I believe, they've engaged students in many ways. You mentioned about the issue of Great Zimbabwe, but I'm told the students, the Student Representative Council, they met with the administration, which means the administration was even eager to liaise with the students, and even eager to give students a platform to share their concerns or to proffer what they believe the administration and students can work to make sure that there's a conducive learning environment. So it shows that even those institutions, they're doing enough. They're doing enough in terms of trying to have a proper administrative conduct. What would be your comment on that?
No, no, they are not. They are not. I'll say they are not because most of the institutions they take advantage of the students. Because remember, we are dealing with the professors, and we are only doing undergraduate degrees, which we are not, which you haven't completed yet. So most of the conduct which are happening, these student representative councils are not aware. And number two is, remember, it's not only ZINASU or the other unions. Uh, it's a coalition of so many unions and so many independent students. So most of the administrations, especially state-owned universities, remember our universities have been politicized a lot. And to take, for example, at University of Zimbabwe, they are using the divide and rule. To say, I know you are supposed to support the admin, and these ones they'll be just isolated. So for now, for students now, they actually clash each other in that same meeting, and then the administration will just say, I know we are taking these points, and then in some cases they just call you maybe at 10 a.m. And say we have a future revision meeting at 11 a.m. Be available, and you are not even prepared. Have you even gathered any data? Have you even liaised with the students, which is your constituents? So I would to say that the administrations are trying and doing enough. I would say that will be dishonest on the part of that man.
Okay, yeah, getting your point. I get your point, but my issue remains the same.
Yeah,
You know, Section 68 talks about the substantive part and the procedural part.
yeah.
So it then means that the idea of the administration calling students to those fees revision meetings and giving them enough chance to present what they think that's the procedural aspect we're talking about. That's the procedural aspect. But on that same note, you mentioned that students they use the divide and rule, but you know, in any given case, me and you can't have the same views,
Yeah,
even if we are fighting for the same cause.
yeah.
So students, they are subject to divergent views, diverging views. Of course, yes, they may be all student representative council members, but they are subject to different views when dealing with student issues. So we can't say that they're using the divide and rule contest, but students, they've got their different views. So it doesn't mean that if they've got diverging views, then you're saying the administration is not fair on that aspect. So I need you to clarify. Yes, you've done fees reviews, review meetings. You offer your own solutions, which you think can best work for the students. How does those administrations respond to your submissions?
I'll say they've never taken any submissions.
Mm,
I'm glad you talk about the procedural part,
mm.
but the procedural part is not just rubber stamping and say, I know, we did this. But when we talk of a procedure, like it's like you're cooking salsa. Don't just conclude by jumping. Just put your water and it's cold, and then you put your meal. No, it's a procedure. You have to wait for the water to boil first, and then you go to the next stage. You go to the next stage. You go to the next stage. But these procedures are being done in a half. And not are being followed stage by stage, stage by stage. We don't have to be theoretical about it. We just have to be constitutional about it. Just follow the constitution, right?
But it's impractical. It's impractical.
Yeah, but the constitution has to be practiced. That's why it was voted for. That's why those rules were said to be there so that they can be followed. Remember, this it's not like UZ is having its meeting today at the same time as GZU, at the same time as African City, at the same time as NAST. There are different days and different weeks. But these ministers are stubborn, and also I don't think they know what they should do. So to say we have to be practical, you can't be everywhere. If you can't, then he should send the deputy minister. But we are not seeing the deputy minister again. It's just the administration and one student to take for example choose it. It's either the secretary general alone or the president. It's the president actually, But when he is not available, the Secretary General or the Vice President is the one who attends that meeting. One student against because it's set about with about 12 people, and you're only one student debating with all these professors.
Okay, there's an aspect I don't agree with you. We are saying like universities like the University of Zimbabwe. The same applies with Great Zimbabwe. The same applies with NAST, which are state owned. But those universities, we have got vice chancellors there. There are people there in the administration. Would you deny it if I say those people they represent the minister? They can be there to represent. Suppose the minister is representing the state. So when the administration at a certain university is there having a dialogue with students, we can basically say that the minister is being represented there. Maybe so you're saying the administration is not doing enough work, they are not relaying the same message to the
Okay,
minister.
what happens is the constitution now comes to say the minister is the one who approves those fees, and the vice chancellor can't do it. Even the chancellor himself, who is the president, cannot approve those fees. It's only done by the minister. So to say that maybe Professor Mapfumo, who is the vice chancellor at UZ, is here, Professor Obo, who is the vice chancellor at GZU, I was there, or he is in that meeting. In most cases, which he won't be available, there will be at UZ. I remember there was the deputy registrar and some proctor vice chancellors and so forth. So these people are not the ones who approve the fees. They are just there to maybe to help in the building of a fees structure which they think should be set for that particular semester.
Okay. I think this is a matter we should need more time to move over or to discuss. But
Okay.
it's a very, very important aspect. It's a very,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
important aspect, which I believe even our listeners or even our viewers, they have to understand that in any given case, there's devolution of power, there's decentralization of power. But okay, let me jump to the next question. Uh, how do you think the government and those administrative authorities at our different institutions can promote greater collaboration between the government itself and the students? How do you think we can feasibly include students in decision making?
Okay, the issue of inclusion is it's actually in three main compartments, which is collaboration, which is consultative, and which is we can say student led in this case. So, but we have seen most of these initiatives, especially maybe between the students and the government. It's mostly about consultative. You're just called, no, we have a lecture with the minister of the youth in this hall. Come, you will give you a lecture, and you are there. He starts lecturing you, and and just you are just giving your views which we are not going to get feedbacks on. But this consultative is proven beyond any reasonable doubts and has stood the test of time to say, no, it doesn't work. So what is needed is now collaboration, where you are saying, no, the student should be not just called, to the table to eat the cake, but they should help in baking the cake, in molding it, and to make sure that between the government and the students, they come up with something which they made together. But if you look, maybe for example, at the issue of the curriculum, which you are battling with, the 5.0 curriculum, which includes modular learning, where you're learning 3 weeks, and the third week you are writing exams, and you're also faced with the other extracurricular activities, or maybe you're going to work and you're paying your fees and you're supposed to do all this. But if students have been consulted or in terms of have been collaborated in the building of that model of learning, I don't think I would have been facing this predicament. So I encourage the institutions and the government to do more of collaboration in the student-led initiatives.
Okay. Since you're looking at the administrative aspect, you mentioned about the issue of like collaboration, the issue of inclusiveness in terms of decision making. Then at the same time, you mentioned about the curriculum, which I believe has raised many waves across Zimbabwe. Students that are in disagreement, students that are not agreeing with this certain curriculum. And to mention, recently I was following the interviews of judges. there's certain interview who even mentioned about that aspect, saying students now, we have ill-prepared graduates which are being dished
which is true.
to the public,
Which is true.
based on the curriculum which you are using. So I want to link it to the administrative aspect. You say there's lack of consultation, the education, the current policy which is being implemented, there's absence of consultation. But we have seen that some institutions and even some communities, they've appreciated it, they've praised it, to say that no, Zimbabwe, we have to move with time. Other countries, they are now using the 6.0, if I'm not mistaken, the 6.0 education curriculum. In Zimbabwe, it doesn't have to be left behind. What would be your take on that? Zimbabwe
My,
just to
my,
move with time.
my take on that is we are jumping. Zimbabwe cannot teleport, from where it is and try to reach where Finland is, where countries like Norway, the US, Europe, China is, because we have different economies, and we are still a developmental state. We are still developing, and we haven't reached. I think we are even 60 years behind of those countries. So when we now try to match with those countries which have evolved beyond us. Look, I mean, those countries are using the Starlinks and so forth, but here in Zimbabwe, it's even being criminalized. So how can you expect that same country to jump, in terms of its education and its policies to the same heights? I think the Zimbabwean, government, and especially the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education should not be over ambitious or overzealous, because we don't have those resources. We was given the resources. The 5.0 requires us to have resources, number one, to have a working economy, number two, because what it requires now is that when you start for 3 weeks, it means you are required to have adequate adequate resources to start in those 3 weeks, and it also means that our economy has to be good, that everyone, either we have grants to pay for our fees, we don't have to go and hustle in these 3 weeks, or our parents are getting enough salaries so that we don't have to hustle and don't be on campus and not studying on these same 3 weeks. Because if the economy was right, I don't think anyone was going to have kind of problem with it, because I think we'd have even universities of sports and something like that.
Okay, on that so are you saying, apart from what we are currently facing in Zimbabwe, the policy, the education 5.0 is a good policy? Do you agree with me on that aspect?
It's I think in other countries it
No,
might
I
be.
mean in general,
In general, I
not
don't
like.
think so. In
Why?
general,
Because
I don't think
it's
so.
looking at like
I don't think so.
research,
Yeah,
innovativeness.
exactly.
We are moving. We are now in an era whereby
Industrialization.
we have got IAs,
Yes.
which is now the talk of the town. So we're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about technology. We're talking about industrialization. So can you say that the education
But
5.0 is not an
okay,
ideal for Zimbabwe?
let me say this to you. Do you think do you think if the doctors which invented the ARVs learned in that manner 3 weeks, and then they write exams without any memory of what they learned, they would have produced those pills? They would have not, because it is not giving ample time, number one, to the students for enough research. It is promoting research. It talks about encouragement, for research and innovation, but at the same time it is not giving enough time to the student to research, because research requires time. It requires patience, because it's experimenting, and if it fails you have to do it again. But in this case they're just moving theoretically, but the practical part, because research is all about practical, but we are just learning theoretically. In fact, we are not learning, we are cramming things which are being taught. We are being fed, we cram, and then we just pass, and then we forget about it all. Because if you ask me what I wrote the last module, I don't even know, but I passed it.
But that is your problem.
No, it's
But
not my
that
problem.
would be a
It's not my
problem.
problem. It's not my
But so
problem
we
at
can't
all.
blame that.
We, we,
We
we,
can't
we
blame
we
that
are
on
not
the government.
mastering. That
Yes.
is the reason why we are
Mm.
producing baked graduates. Why? Because we are not mastering the concept. We are not, able to master this concept in that so space of time. We are doing about 3 modules in a month, or 2 modules at least in a month. And at the same time, like I said, you have other things to do in your life. How can you manage? We are not robots. Come on.
But I understand your point. I understand where you're coming from. But I've heard in universities, there's the thing which they call a week to save a semester. I've heard
Is
about
there?
a lot of those things. A week to save a semester, even when you're using the semester-based type of learning, which is contrary to this modular type of learning. Students would still read for their exams maybe a week before or 2 weeks before. So what's the difference with the
No,
modular learning? What's
I
the difference? Students
no,
will remain
it's
will remain
different. It's
students.
different.
Students will
It's
remain.
different.
The
It's
problem
different.
is not the problem
No,
is not the
it's
curriculum.
it's different. We can't overgeneralize, based on the sentiments that just come out of students. You know, because if you are to be honest, if you learn something, the whole semester, there's no way you are not going to go to that to lecture every day. You have to go to the lecture. They used to do even projects. Mid semester projects. You do project for that particular module so that the lecturer will make sure that you assess actually if you have actually understood that concept. But now there's no time for that. There's clearly no time for that.
So
So we
okay,
can't we can't we can't base on those sentiments to say
okay. So how do you link? How can you say the administrations in those in tertiary institutions in Zimbabwe, they are failing on that aspect? How do you feel they are failing?
in
Uh,
terms of
in terms of the administrative aspect, we are
of
saying we're saying
modular.
that when they're doing when they're like implementing things which affect students, like we're talking about the lack of staff
Yep.
in universities.
Mhm.
Then you're talking about having limited time
Mhm.
to do researches.
To
How do
researches.
you think the administrations are feeling on that aspect, and how can they improve on on student to lecturer ratio or even resources?
I'll say it's more like a governmental problem than it is an institution, because these state institutions are controlled by the government. They're state owned, which means they are government owned institutions. So I think the government have to be deliberate on what they want to achieve in a certain amount of time. They talk of the Vision 2030, but are they doing enough to make sure that they achieve that vision? Because a nation which does not invest in the education of its people, in its education sector, that nation is investing for doom. So this government of ours have to make sure that they do enough in terms of their policies, in terms of the monies that they are paying to these lecturers. Because the lecturers, it's not like we don't have educated people in Zimbabwe. We have so many educated people in Zimbabwe. We have people like Dr. Pilenza Mchia, who is a doctor in Harvard. We have people like Professor Tamtambara, who is teaching in South Africa. So imagine if these people, and so many which I can't mention, were to actually, do lectures and teach in this country, I think we would have reached far and we have better better education. But the thing is, our government is not being deliberate on it, and also the issue of the salaries, because people end up going for greener pastures where they can have better salaries than to stay here.
So you're saying poor salaries, they are the reasons why you have got brain drain, like in terms of our education in Zimbabwe.
I would say it's part of it. Because we have got, if we are to look at brain drain, it's maybe for the main reason is poor salaries, and the other reason is in terms of research and innovation, in terms of investing, because there are other academias, academics, which are not moved or are not enthusiastic more about the salary, but they are there because they are driven by knowledge. They want to know, they want to research and to break, to break barriers, like things like cures for HIV and AIDS and so forth. But this, our education and our government is not doing enough in terms of resources. So some people end up going to other places. For example, Professor Adam Tambara once worked at NASA, but we don't have such kind of facilities in here. And such a person who have such a greater vision, in terms of his academics, you cannot remain in a country where what you want to achieve is not there.
But but okay, there are a lot of things I disagree with you. Like
Yeah.
we look at like the government, its policy implementation. Yes, we may differ in terms of how I view the government policy implementation and how I view the government policy implementation. But I've seen in those state-controlled universities, even in private universities, they've got innovation hubs which have been established there and trying to improve innovation, trying to move along with the Vision 2030. Can we say on that aspect the government is not doing enough? We need to be realistic.
Okay.
It's not always that I understand your students where you come from. You say the government is like maybe it's like always against us. It's like always against us. So everything that comes from the government, it's a lie or it's treachery. I mean, I don't know
Okay,
how we can put it, but
I'll put it to this to this way. If that shirt you're wearing,
yeah.
was made in maybe in South Africa, and it was made in South Africa. And these shirts we already have these shirts in here. Alright, it was maybe made in here by some certain company and in Zimbabwe, and we already had this shirt. And then you go to the innovation hub, and they start to sew the same shirt and say, "I know we are innovating." That's what they are doing. You look, they are producing cooking oil, which is the same cooking oil we are having, which is being, in other industries like the Zim Gold, Pure Drop, and so forth. But these are the things that they are doing, the things which are being produced in the industries. Because I understand innovation is about breaking barriers. It is about creating a new technology and the new things which is not yet there. So if you continue to make things which are there, we are just reproducing things which are there. We are not innovating. And it shows the level of intellectual laziness by these people.
Mm. Okay. On that aspect, I haven't much invested in trying. I haven't attended in innovation hub for me to say I can disagree with you. But it's news to me. It's news to me to discover that
Okay.
you are saying that they are simply like copycating
Yeah,
the products which are already
they're
there. But
photocopying. Yeah.
my belief is like with innovation, we are like trying to improve the industry, the local industry, sort of like
Creating
indigenization,
hybrids, what? Yeah.
yeah, so, something like that. Okay, let me move on to another question. What role do you think student activism can play in advocating for reforms and improvements in terms of how our administrations can respect Section 68?
Student activism. Come again.
Okay, I'm saying, what role do you think student activism can play in trying to make sure that the administrations they improve on how they respect Section 68 as a constitutional right that gives everyone the right to a fair, to a prompt, to an efficient
Appropriate,
administrative
yeah.
action? How do you
Proportionate.
think student activism can aid on that aspect?
I think activism, it's all about making your voice heard. It's all about speaking out the issues or your grievances. So I think if the students are being deliberate enough collectively in terms of their unions or in terms of their numbers, and they are saying no, we are not fighting this. Either it's through the streets, which is constitutionally underpinned under section 59, or it is through the courts, which is also constitutionally underpinned under that same under that same section 68. So I think student activism can help a lot in terms of advocates and lobbying, in terms of to make sure that section 68 it is improved both legally and confrontational. That is to say, radically.
Okay. Section 68, specifically under subsection 3, paragraph B, it says an act of parliament must give effect to the rights and must impose a duty on the state to give effect to the rights in subsections 1 and 2, and also to promote an efficient administration. But I've seen at the commencement of this year, ZINASU, you took different institutions to court, challenging fees, challenging fiscal, lack of fiscal discipline. But there are certain orders that were given at the courts. Some of them I have heard they have not been complied with. What would be your take on that? What would be your take on that? But yet, it is said that the state has got a responsibility imposed on them to say they have to respect, they have to enforce the administrative right we have is entitled in the constitution?
I'll say I'll put you that at that parliament we've got, it's a kangaroo parliament. That's number one, and number two, the 10th August House Parliament, the caliber of people that we have in that parliament, they are reflective, uh, that they are reflection that the Augusta House that we have is actually a house of shallow people, because they are not being deliberate. In fact, they are not performing their duties. That's number one. They're just
But
going
but
there.
but, but
They're
wait.
just they're sleepies.
Eh,
They go there, they sleep, they get salaries.
mm.
That's all they care about.
But wait. Before we delve more into that aspect,
Yeah.
we are saying the parliament, how can you involve the parliament in issues whereby our administrations or invested administrations or tertiary institution administration when they fail to comply with court orders? Remember, here we're talking about tertiary institutions. It's not only universities. We're dealing with polytechnics, we're dealing with teachers colleges, we're dealing with the vocational centers and stuff. Those are tertiary institutions, but the administrations there, they don't comply with the court order, right? So how can it be the problem of the parliament in that aspect?
No, it's we can't say we are pushing the whole blame to the parliament, but the parliament, like the constitution says, the parliament has to enforce an effect to make sure that these orders are followed. But are they doing that on their part to say, I know we have done our part, but they are not following. They are not putting that effect. They are not doing that. The parliament is not doing that.
But the enforcement aspect is not the parliament's duty. It's not the parliament's duty. The parliament
Like like
implements the
like like
laws.
like like like, like, like no, you can read again the subsection
The
seven.
subsection. Okay,
Seven,
I can take it for you.
yeah.
It says an act of parliament
Mm,
must give effect to these rights. It must impose a duty on the state to give effect to the rights in subsection 1 and 2 and promote an efficient administration. So it means an act of parliament must give effect to those things. And as you were saying, the constitution is an act of
yeah,
parliament.
an act of
Then there are
parliament.
different statutory instruments which can be enacted by the parliament.
Yes.
But my question is saying
Mm.
the enforcement part, we've got three arms of
Yeah, yeah,
government
yeah,
under the doctrine of
yeah,
separation of
yeah,
powers.
yeah, yeah.
We've got the parliament,
The
we've got
government,
we've
the
got the
judiciary.
executive, the judiciary. The judiciary, it has done its part.
Yeah.
It has said no. At the University of Zimbabwe or at Chino University,
Mm.
the administration has to follow maybe the payment of fees exclusively in the local currency. That's the order which is given by the court to give an example.
Yeah.
But now the enforcement part, it rests
I,
on the executive.
I'll
It's
put.
now it's no longer the duty of the parliament. Neither
I'll,
is it the duty of the
I'll,
judiciary.
I'll say. I'll say. If the court says, I know, you comrade, you've done this, and you should pay this by the end of that. I think it's also the duty of the same students to go back to the same court which have ruled in their favor to say, I know these people are not following the same orders. And then the court now, I will say, it's either to say, I know we are now giving you a court order to do this by this time. If you do not, we are going to take such action, or maybe they will advise you to take your matter to their court.
But no,
But at the same time, we are saying the enforcing part, it is the executive,
Yes.
right? But now, if you look at the executive, the head of that executive, it is the president, who is also the chancellor of all state universities. So for the chancellor now to say, because the assumption is what the vice chancellors here are doing, they are doing it with the orders of the chancellor. So for now, for the chancellor now to say, I know you guys, to say, I know this was wrong, I do this, I do that, do that. I think you will be contradicting himself, which is also a part which I disagree on our constitution in general. To say the chancellor is the president is the chancellor of all universities. I think we don't have to have vice chancellors at universities, and the president don't have to be a chancellor. Just needs chancellors at universities, and that's all. The president can play other duties if he comes. Yeah, he can. to keep people as the president and do that. But to say, I know, the chancellor, I know, I don't think it will be good in terms of the works of administration.
So, okay, so from your point of view, you're saying the involvement of the executive in top administration posts
Yeah.
in tertiary institutions in
Mm,
Zimbabwe
mm.
is the same thing that is militating against those same administrations from implementing the
Exactly.
dictates of Section 68. So you're
Exactly.
saying we can't have administrative justice in tertiary institutions
Exactly.
when the executive, who is supposed to enforce those certain rights, are involved
Mm.
uh, in those administration. So
Because
you are now
remember,
saying it's a
because
situation whereby the executive is eating or is enjoying both halves
Of
of the cake.
exactly, because remember this executive is the same executive which is on record, or which is not following rule of law in everything they do. They do not follow, rule of law. Look at the Mtapa Investment Fund. Look at the court mafia. You look at anything. They are not following the rule of law. They are not following the procedures of the parliament, the procedures of the court. So these are the same thing, which I think we cannot limit this case to the tertiary education or to the administrative part of the Ministry of Education, but we can actually, you know, overall look at it as the lack of rule of law in Zimbabwe, which is emanating from a bad political culture which have engulfed this country.
Okay, okay. But as you try to sum up this session
Yeah,
with you, uh, we have seen what would be your take, what would be your solution? We have seen universities,
yeah,
you have like ZINASU as a union which is representing all students. You have taken universities to court uh, through individuals, but those orders have not been complied with. And you're saying institutions, they're still demanding fees in US dollars, they're still demanding fees, some exclusively in US dollars, others maybe there's a ratio, but there are certain court orders. How do you think, if we were to say you are the executive today, how would you enforce those orders to make sure that they reflect what the students need? How would you enforce them?
if I was the executive, I would say I'll appoint better people, because what this problem is not only emanating from these people being stubborn. Because remember, the chancellor, who is the president, is in charge of, they appoint the all the vice chancellors in state universities. They're just appointed. So it means I'm not appointing my people who are loyal to me, who goes by my orders. So in this case, I'll honestly appoint people who are honest, who have integrity, and people who follow the rule of law and who follow orders. But also, I think this has to be, if as the union we are going to take this as a campaign to say, I know they should implement sort of a commission to interview and for the vice chancellor's post, to be out for the public. The people they apply, they go through a process, they go through interviews, and then we have the outstanding one to say, I know we are not appointing you for the post of the vice chancellor at the Great Zimbabwe University or Lupane State University, rather than just an appointment, because they are now becoming political posts, which is hard to control.
Okay. You've been talking like if you say as a union when you're doing the campaign, it just reminds me you're doing your campaign education for all. You're fighting to make sure that students they've got access to different facilities at different tertiary institutions. To sum up this, what would be your message? What would be your message to all other students across Zimbabwe to say the administrations despite the aspect that they have to respect Section 68 to make sure that their decisions they are reasonable, they are prompt, they are efficient, they address all those things which are needed by the students. What would be your message to the students in general?
My message to the students in general, and I will say to them, the fight for academic freedoms, the fight for education for all, the fight for education without barriers is not a fight for ZINASU. It is not a fight for the union members, but it is a fight for every student who knows that he or she comes from the poor background. It is a fight of every student and who knows that he or she comes from unprivileged, underprivileged areas. It is not only a fight to the students, but it is also a fight for the workers, It is the same fight for our parents, because our parents are the ones are mostly who pays. And for the workers, some students are workers. They are also the ones who are supposed to pay for their own fees. And so I would advocate and say to other unions and all other, workers unions, student unions, to come together for collective bargaining, to go as one voice to the government to say, as the workers, as the students, as the parents, we are saying this, and we are saying we want free education. We are saying we want education for all. We are saying we want education without barriers. So to the general students, I say, do your part, play your part to make sure that your future is intact, to make sure that you have that your future is good. Because today you are a student, but tomorrow we are workers in transition, and we are also parents in transition. So we don't want to face these same problems which our parents are facing today. So I will put it to them that do your part as the students.
Thank you so much for joining us today at the Defiant Students Voice. This was Tatenda Kutsirayi, the Harare spokesperson, engaging us today on the topic, looking at the status of higher tertiary institutions in Zimbabwe, looking at the administrative aspect. So we have discussed a lot of stuff, a lot of things, which I'm glad that Mr. Tatenda has highlighted, maybe to the best interest of the viewers. We always invite you to other sessions basing on this same topic, given that if events are evolving, you've got the issue at Great Zimbabwe. There are many issues which are being done by a union, and you've said we are pushing the campaign.
Yeah.
So it means we have more time with you here at the Defiant Students Voice. So thank you so much for viewing this podcast, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Daniel.